Weaving is a technique of producing fabrics by intertwining two separate yarns or threads at right angles to form a fabric or cloth. The two threads are called warp and weft. Warps are going up and down vertically, and the wefts go side to side horizontally. A piece of burlap is a great example of the early fabrics. Fabrics are woven on a loom, which is a frame that holds the warp threads in place while weft is woven through them. Handmade rugs use these same principles with, of course, the addition of the hand-tied knots, which we will see shortly. There are three major steps in weaving a rug. 1 is to build the foundation. 2 is weaving the rug itself. And 3 is about finishing a rug. This is the design we're going to weave today. A rug design is typically drawn on grid paper called a cartoon. It helps the weaver keep track of the pattern and color changes. Each square represents a hand-tied knot. Of course, some weavers have traditional designs memorized in their head, and some may improvise along the way. No matter what the design will be, they have to decide how wide and long the rug will be before they begin. Once we decide how large the rug will be, we will need a strong frame called a loom to withstand the high pressures while weaving a rug. Note that our weft and warps are made of cotton. As mentioned earlier, step 1 in making a rug is to build a foundation. Again, the fundamental principle of all woven fabrics is the intertwining or interlocking between warps and wefts. This picture shows you exactly what I'm talking about. The strings going up and down are called warps, and the ones going horizontally from side to side are called wefts. Each hand-tied knot is wrapped around 2 warp strings. Depending on how many knots our rug will have horizontally, it will dictate how many warps we will need. Our design has 23 knots on each horizontal row, so we'll need double that number or 46 warps. Also, we will need 4 additional pieces of warp on both sides of the rug as a selvage, which will provide protection from wear on the edges. So in total, we need 54 warps, 46 for the rug design and 8 for the edges. The warps will be under a lot of tension on the loom. It is critical to keep the warps under even tension to avoid issues while weaving. So what I'm doing is using a simple bottle of water to apply even pressure on each warp as I add it to the loom. Notice the 2 strings which I'm alternately going over and under as the warp goes up and down. As you will see later, keeping the warp separated is a critical part of the weaving process, and we need to get this part right. The reason will become obvious shortly. We continue adding warps until we reach the desired number, which is dictated by our design, in this case 54 warps. We will also replace the 2 strings with 2 sticks to create 2 sheds. You will see why shortly. We are going to need a mechanism to help us with the intertwining of the warps and wefts. We will do this by using what's called a heddle stick, or as it's called in Farsi, a kuji. It will keep the warps separated so the wefts can pass through them. To show you exactly how it works, I'm going to use a loom I've set up for that purpose. Here I'm using two colors of warps to help demonstrate this principle. As mentioned, each knot is wrapped around a pair of warps. So each pair of adjacent white and blue strings will be used to tie one knot consecutively across the loom. For this demonstration, the white warp will always be on the right and the blue warp will always be on the left. It is critical to ensure that all the right or white warps are on top of one shed stick, while all the left or blue warps are on top of the other. The heddle stick or kuji will help us keep the white and blue strings separated so that the wefts will pass over and under every other warp on each row, creating the intertwining effect which helps keep everything securely in place once we take it off the loom. Here the larger piece of wood is added as a spacer. The reason will be evident shortly. As you can see, a piece of string is passed behind each blue warp and tied to the heddle stick. Here is a back view so you can see exactly how it works. Wrapping around the blue warps to keep them separated. We're done once we've gone through all the blue warps. We will pull out the piece of wood, which as you can see has provided some extra space. The heddle stick is then tied securely to the loom itself. This is how it works. As the shed stick is pulled down, it forces all the white or right warps to be pushed forward. As you can see, this creates a gap called the shed through which a weft can be passed over the blue and under the white warps. In contrast, when the shed stick is pushed upward, it allows the blue or left warps to come forward and creates another shed where the weft can pass under the blue warps and over the white warps. This piece of white paper demonstrates the principle again. At this point, please focus on what needs to happen, which is a way for the weft to be passed through every other warp. There are different ways of accomplishing the same goal. Although simple, it is an ingenious way to keep the warps separated. We're continuing with step 1, which is building a foundation. Next step in building a foundation is securing the base for weaving. I will be adding sticks, which provides a strong footing to start weaving. Again, I'm using the kuji to help pass over and under the right and left warps, which will provide the secure interlock foundation. Double knots are used to keep the rug from unraveling once the rug is taken off the loom, and from years of wear and use. A string is wrapped around each pair of warps twice to make it secure. We will add 2 rows of the double knot. As you recall, the strings going side to side horizontally are called wefts. We'll use a simple tool with a hook to pass the weft through the warps. The shed stick is up, so all the left or blue warps are pushed forward. It is then beaten down using this tool, which looks like a comb. Next, the shed stick is pushed down, pushing all the right or white warps forward. We'll pass the weft through the warps and beat it down using the comb again. This process is repeated, as we'll see shortly. Now we're back to our loom to continue with our rug. Notice that I've completed the heddle stick and have built a foundation by adding the sticks and tying double knots. Now we're ready for step 2, weaving. Again, wefts are strings going side to side horizontally. The shed stick is down, so all the right warps are pushed forward. We'll use the tool with a hook to pass the weft through the warps. Then we'll beat it down using the tool, which looks like a comb. Care must be taken to make sure the weft is distributed evenly across the entire row. Next, the shed stick is up, so all the left warps are pushed forward. At the other end, the weft is wrapped around the selvage and ready for the next row. This time we'll pass the weft going from left to right. We will continue until we've added several wefts. The rows of wefts are added both for aesthetic reasons, also it helps keep the knots secure. The several rows of wefts is called a colleen. Also, if you look closely, you will see the formation, which looks like a piece of burlap. Once the colleen is done, we're ready to start tying knots following our design. Let's go back to the other loom again to see how the knots are formed. Each knot is wrapped around 2 warps, that is one white and one blue. There are 2 main types of knots. One is called the Persian knot, the other is called the Turkish knot, or Azeri in Farsi. I have isolated 2 warps for a close-up on how the knot is tied. I'm using a tool which is a sharp knife with a hook at the end of it. The knot material, which is wool, passes between the 2 warps, travels under the right warp and comes out on the right side, then goes over and around the left warp, and then it's pulled out from between the 2 warps. We'll look at this a few times. We're back again to our loom to begin weaving. Referring back to our cartoon, our first row of knots will be in blue. We'll begin to add the knots. I have marked a few of the left warps in blue as a reference from the other loom. We'll begin to add the knots. Once the row of knots is complete, we'll add a weft to keep the knots secure. Notice that the interlocking of the warp and wefts will keep the entire row secure as we build up, one row at a time. The edges of rugs are called selvages, where the wefts are wrapped before we begin the next row of knots. Later we will add an overcast, which helps with aesthetics and protect the rug from wear on the edges. Remember, I used 4 warps on each side for the selvage. This rug will only have 1 weft for each row of knots. Some rugs may have 2, 3 or more wefts for each row. Once the knots and the weft are added, we will use a pair of traditional scissors to trim the excess wool from the knots. I have just completed the second row and I'm adding the weft. Couple of things to mention. I'm using a simple jig to keep a constant length on the pile as I trim each row of knots. I'm also using a different pair of scissors which is more comfortable for my hands. Again, please focus on what needs to happen rather than how it's being done. Meaning, we need a way to keep the pile trimmed as evenly as possible, which will help in the end as we finish the rug. Also, the more comfortable the weaver's hand, the faster the weaving process. I've completed 2 rows. Here's the back of the loom to help you see a different view of the knots as they're being added. We will again add a weft. This process will be repeated until the rug is finished. Pay attention to a weave pattern developing on the back of the rug as we continue to add rows of knots. Experts will always examine the back of the rug as the weave pattern will provide clues on where the rug was woven originally. Let me be clear, this rug is actually being woven by me in Chattanooga, Tennessee. I am, however, using similar techniques used in the city of Malayer in Iran. Although this rug is not made to exacting measures, actual rugs woven in this city all have similar weave patterns on the back, which is recognizable by experts. After we have woven 5 rows of blue knots, according to our design, it is time to add a new color to the weave. We will need 3 blue knots on either end and the rest will be red. After weaving 4 rows with red, we'll need to add more colors. We will count the knots accordingly each time and add the knots in appropriate areas. Color change is a critical part of rug weaving, as you can imagine. A weaver is making constant decisions on what colors to use and where. The more complicated the design, the more complex the decision-making process becomes. One of the differences in Persian rugs made in Iran versus rugs made in other areas is the variety of colors used and the harmony displayed in the final product. Here's how the rug looks halfway through the weaving. Again, notice the weave on the back of the rug. Here is a picture of the completed rug. We will now repeat the process from the beginning of the rug in reverse, meaning that we will add several rows of wefts, which are known as a colleen, and we will finish with 2 rows of double knots. The rug gets cut off the loom to complete the final steps. One of the final steps is adding an overcast to the selvage to protect the edges from wear and tear. Here's how the overcast gets added to the rug. A piece of wool, typically matching the edge color, is wrapped around the selvage using a needle. This process is repeated on both sides of the rug. Next step is trimming the pile to the desired length. It is then washed and dried. Finally, the warp strings are trimmed on each end, which will become the fringe. How long the fringe is will depend on the weaver or the tradition in each weaving areas. Here's the final piece. Just a couple of points. Please notice from the back of the rug, each hand-tied knot is represented by 2 nodes. This is not the case for all rugs. You may want to pause the video for a closer look. As I mentioned earlier, I have used similar weaving techniques as applied in the city of Maloyer in Iran. Here's a picture of an old Maloyer rug. Feel free to pause the video. Although one is brand new and the other about 80 years old, can you see similarities in the weave pattern from the back? How about now? I have included a rug from Hamadan. Just like Maloyer, it uses 1 weft, and from the back, 2 nodes represent 1 knot. Can you see how our rug and the Maloyer share many similarities as compared to the Hamadan? This is what I've been talking about. The weave pattern, which appears in the back of the rug, is consistent in each weaving area. It is my goal to help rug enthusiasts around the world to better understand these patterns. There are many techniques and weave patterns which have developed over the centuries in different rug making regions. The country of Iran has made the most significant contributions in weaving, designs, and quality. In general, some of the best rugs in the world have been made by Iranians over the centuries. This is not intended to undermine other wonderful weavers all over the world. It is, however, a recognition of the sheer volume of beauty and quality produced by Iranian weavers over the centuries. Although both experience and time are required to begin recognizing these patterns, having an expert in your corner will go a long way to help. Find an established dealer in your area and you will be well on your way to finding what types of rugs and designs appeal to you and begin enjoying a lifelong fascination with handmade rugs. At this point, you have seen all the major steps in weaving a rug. Of course, there are variations of these techniques. However, The principle of what needs to happen, meaning building a foundation, weaving and finishing the rugs, remains the same. I hope that you have found this video helpful in better understanding the process of weaving a handmade rug.